of Joker 2?
Well, first I'll add, can you read the plot summary and things? Because I can't pronounce the title. So, and
I'll do
then I'll
it.
jump into to what I think about it. But I'm embarrassedly can't speak the French title of this.
Yeah, happy to take it. So it's Joker Folie, directed by Todd Phillips, starring Joaquin Phoenix, Lady Gaga, Brendan Gleeson. Quick logline: struggling with his dual identity, failed comedian Arthur Fleck meets the love of his life, Harley Quinn, while incarcerated at Arkham State Hospital.
Okay, so I'll share my thoughts first on this. Well, actually, before I talk about Joker 2, just my thoughts on Joker 1, because I think that is important to know
Mm-hmm.
going into this. I very much do not like the first Joker film. I've only seen it one time in theaters. Sort of general thoughts on it are just is not a very well made film. I think Todd Phillips is just not a very talented filmmaker, and he took on material and themes that are well beyond his capabilities as an artist. Basically, just throwing out a bunch of ideas on isolation and societal, austerity and all these different things that, yes, these are legitimate concerns in our society, but didn't really do anything with those things. He just tossed the themes out, even themes that were contradictory to one another, and expected you as an audience to, I guess, piece that together, which I don't think is because he's so talented that it's sort of ambiguous on purpose. I think he's just not talented at all. Though I think the visuals are very interesting. I thought they did a great job with the production design and the world building of this sort of cribbing on Scorsese late 70s style. But overall, I think it's a bad film, the first one. Despite Joaquin, I think it's interesting what he did in the first movie, though. As a big Batman fan, I just think the portrayal of the Joker was just wrong. And like, what was the point if you're going to make a movie calling it Joker to pull no elements of what makes the Joker interesting in your film? Just call it something else, and that movie might have been a little better for me. So those are my thoughts on the first one. Going into the second one, I had very low expectations. Sometimes you walk into a movie being ready to dislike it, which is fine. Like, I still want to see movies I know I'm not going to like because maybe I might like it. There are those surprises that happen out there. But this movie was way worse than I had imagined. And I think actually, I can't remember a movie I hated seeing in the theaters more than this. Everything that was wrong with the first movie, they expounded upon that. But the biggest crime, which is the thing that a lot of the movies that are bad have, is it was freaking boring. Just so incredibly boring. This movie takes place basically in a room in a prison and then a room in a courtroom and then it's over.
Mm-hmm.
So claustrophobic, but not in like a interesting way. Like it just was incredibly boring. And Joaquin's Phoenix performance, I just so over it. Like I think there were some interesting things maybe you could say what we did in the first movie. And this movie, he's just playing a less interesting, like more dialed down version of the Arthur Fleck character he created in the first movie, which didn't even make it that interesting to watch. Like at least in the first one, you're like, oh, what is he gonna do? How's he gonna respond to this? He was portraying his Joker persona a lot more in that movie, which even though I say it's not the Joker that I love, but at least it's some interesting performance that you want to see on the screen. You're like, oh, what is he going to do? This movie is just him getting beat on, getting raped, getting kicked around, and that's it. Nothing is interesting about it from a perspective of the actor. And then I'll say one more thing about the musical numbers because I think that's something important to touch on, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts and see if maybe you loved this film. But I knew going in it was a musical. I think that was something that had been leaked. I had assumed then it would be similar to like Scorsese's New York, New York, which I think is one of his worst films by a country mile in terms of how they handle the music. But if you're going to do a musical like this, which the musical sequences take place in like a fantasy type reality, like Chicago or something, the musical numbers, I expected them to be bigger. I wanted like an Elvis or Baz Luhrmann, Moulin Rouge type
Mm-hmm.
production of these musical numbers because it was supposed to be his internal thoughts and he's this crazy guy supposedly. So what crazy things could he possibly be fantasizing when he's thinking about these songs? But it was like he's alone in a room, sitting on a chair with a spotlight on him, and he's singing in a bad voice. I think they're purposely trying to make him sing poorly. Just uninteresting. Way
Yeah.
too small. If you're gonna do songs, which I don't really even like a lot of the songs they chose, this is a jukebox musical, but make them big musical numbers and get you out of this two rooms that the whole movie takes place in. So yeah, I like violently hated this film just because again it was poorly made. I'm not even talking about the message of the movie or it's so dangerous, like all the things people said about the first one. But high level thoughts, hated it. What do you think? Loved it? Best movie of the year?
Yes, best movie of the year of the decade. No, I guess I'll remind it as well a little bit. But the first one, I actually liked it, to be honest. I thought it was well made. Of course, it's not sophisticatedly handling all these complex themes, but I was definitely very intrigued and engaged with the performance and how it looked and delivered whatever it was trying to say. And when you walk out of that movie, you are enveloped by, misery and the plight of this character. And it's a super committed performance from him. Of course, it has issues across the board and what have you, but I actually liked it, I would say, the first one. So when this was announced, I was actually intrigued by the premise that, oh, they're doing a musical, they have Gaga in this, and that could be interesting. And like what you were saying, that's kind of where my head was at that, oh, they're going to really play with the inner monologue of this character, really blow it up. And that actually might be an interesting way to undercut all the misery and the darkness, which, was in the first movie, but I thought would be more off in the second one as well. Oh, but boy, this movie is a slog. It's just so boring, like you said. For the most part of it, nothing happens, to be honest.
Right.
And the musical numbers are total letdown. You have Gaga in your movie who can sing like crazy, use her, and it doesn't undercut the energy at all. In fact, it just sort of it's a vortex that just keeps going down and down and pulls you down with it. But I think the biggest thing that's a disappointing thing to me, which is that who is this movie for? It's almost like Todd Phillips was like, oh, you think that my first movie was troublesome and had bad messages? Let me sort of give you an FU. And it's almost like a giant FU to the people who liked the first one and also the people who hated the first one. So it ends up delivering to nobody, actually. I would have almost preferred if he went even further in the direction of where the first one was, if he wanted to make a second one. But it's sort of nowhere. Ultimately it's sort of just a boring mess. And with him, I agree with you that we've seen this. There's not much on the page, there's not much in the movie for him to do anyway. And guess what? It sort of just becomes a one note thing. Nothing really happens from him either. Of course, the movie looks good and, the production design, all of that, when you do see it is good, but there's nothing that grabs you. The first one, at least, the great score by Hilder and all those great sort of moments and visuals of him dancing on the steps and such, no matter how dark and perhaps beating your own horn like they might be, they are well done and they do stay with you. This movie, nothing stays with you. And from the title itself, like you said, like, why is it in French? It just sort of feels like somebody trying to blow their own horn way too much and kind of eating their own tail. And guess what? Nothing is left at the end. And all the things you said about him just not being a sophisticated director and not being able to handle all these complicated themes that he started, it's almost like now it's all out on the open, which you never want, right? Like I making movies is hard. It's rare that a movie that's dark and complex and ends up making $1 billion and starts the conversation, bad or good, whatever. But it was a phenomenon, the first one. And you, of course, want to wish well for somebody who's had that kind of success to then come back and do something better. But this is almost like, how people with imposter syndrome or actors, they always say like, oh my gosh, they're going to call and say, oh, we made a mistake, we didn't want you,
Right.
we found out that you're a phony. This is kind of that. It's sort of like, yeah, it's all out there and it just, you're a phony, which is a
Yeah.
sad thing. Ultimately, I walked out feeling out of this movie just feeling sad that you put all this money, you put all of this talent, in Joaquin, Gaga, your entire team, all the money that was spent in making this, all this for what? Which is sad. Like, we're in this weird state of movies this year, particularly. I haven't seen anything on the big screen, and this podcast is testament of that I truly actually liked or loved. There's been nothing from my point of view.
Deadpool and Wolverine was a
For
anyway.
you.
Yeah, I mean it was a huge hit with audiences
Yeah.
too. I think they're Inside Out too. I mean, there's been movies that have done well this year,
They've
but
done
I
well. I'm just saying, personally, for me, I
oh
haven't liked
personally, oh
anything.
I see. Okay.
And this was sort of like another slap in the
Mm.
face, if you will. So yeah, I'm not in a good space when it comes to movies, at least from my point of view. They've done well, so I'm happy for that, for the industry, for sure.
Yeah, I think definitely to me, like the first movie I felt also was sort of a I didn't think again like the guy was talented to pull that off, and now it's sort of even though yes, it was a big hit, obviously it was, and a lot of
Yeah.
people liked it, but to me this movie almost shows what I sort of saw in the first one when I
Mhm.
watched it. I'm like, this is just again, some guy who's way in over his skis doesn't really know how to make a competent film. And now that's what people are saying about this one.
Right.
So, in a way, I wonder if the second movie makes the first one worse in people's mind. Because there's a lot of things that, if I look at this just as a Joker film, the first one was an origin. And throughout the entire movie, he's like, how is he becoming the Joker? And at the end, he becomes the Joker, in the final
Mm-hmm.
scene or whatever. Which then the sequel, he gets to be the Joker, which is usually how this stuff goes.
Mm-hmm.
But in this movie, he's actually the Joker less than he is
Right.
in the first one. It's almost like this is a trilogy, and we saw the first movie, which is when he becomes a Joker, and then we skipped over the movie where he is the Joker, and then this is the movie where he doesn't be the Joker anymore. And they only gave us the first one and the third one. There's no actual like beef in this hamburger. It's just two pieces of bread. So as sort of a exploration of this character through the eyes of Todd Phillips, I think he just totally
Yeah. What are you
missed it.
doing? Why are you
What
doing it?
yeah, what just make up some other character then. This is kind of what you want to do. And then you spend half the movie basically rehashing the first one. Like the court scenes are
Right.
just let me explain to you what happened in the first movie. Let me bring back these other characters. I mean, it's like the last episode of Seinfeld was like this, and that universally is hated. So it's like, oh, let me take something that everyone hates and just do that in my movie. What are you thinking? And with Gaga too, I'll just say like I am a Lady Gaga fan. I think she's great. I even like her performances on screen, which have had mixed results, but she was so wasted here. She
Yeah.
didn't have anything to do. She wasn't really in the movie. There was just no way was this any interpretation of Harley Quinn and in any way, shape, or form. So again, just make up another character if you're not going to deliver something that relates to the character from the comics. And they make her sing bad on purpose, I think,
Yeah.
because they don't want the Lady Gaga, but that's in the fantasy sequences. I want to see Lady Gaga do her thing, or at least
Yeah.
contribute one new song. You're hiring one of the most popular pop stars in the world, and yet you'd use all these other older songs. Like
Yeah.
that was like,
Even though she
what are you
has her
thinking?
own album, something around Harley
Oh,
Quinn's
right.
coming out, or it's already out maybe. So then
Yeah.
I was like, oh, why don't you use a song from that? Musicals are so difficult, so tough to make,
Hmm.
show, song and dance in like an elegant way. It's probably one of the hardest thing to do. But the fact that you're now trying to subvert that and undercut that because you're too smart to kind of make a musical, I'm
Right.
like, you first need to know how to make a musical to then sort of say, oh, I'm going to go and screw up with that
Yes.
deliberately. No, you don't get to do any of that, because you don't know how to do this in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, no, this is the Joaquin episode, but we'll talk a little more about Todd Phillips here. After coming out of this movie, he reminds me, and this I kind of felt a little bit this way with Joker 1. He feels like he's someone who wants to be and thinks he is Adam McKay. So Adam McKay was the director of a lot of
Mhm.
amazing
Oh, yeah.
comedies in the first decade of the century, Anchorman, Step Brothers. And then he moved into more kind of serious topic films with The Big Short and Don't Look Up and Vice. I think he can pull that stuff off. I mean, those movies, those last three that I mentioned, we're not all and out comedies, but he's using his comedic chops to make political points and have message movies, if you want to call it that. And Todd Phillips also started out with gross out comedies, Road Trip, Old School, Hangover. And now he's like, oh, I can just take Adam McKay's career and I'll make these message movies like that arms deal movie he did, War Dogs. And then he's trying Joker to be like, oh, look, I'm making something serious. And now this one, oh, I can do a musical, like you said. I'll subvert the musical. It's like, dude, just you're not talented. Pack up your toys and go home. Either give us old school too, or just go away. There's this concept out there as director's jail, which is sort of where,
Yeah.
directors sort of get put in like a quote unquote jail because their movie bombed or whatever. And Hollywood won't work with them. That's what that means. But sometimes I feel like people should be in actual jail. And I think that we should put Todd Phillips in an actual prison after making this movie. And I was sitting there in the theater just looking at the walls, being like, how do I get out of here? Like, if I just smash this, can I do Kool-Aid Man myself out of this theater into the other screen? Because like, I just want to get out of here. I felt like I was on Guantanamo Bay or something. Unbelievable slog of it. Just an absolutely terrible film.
Pointless.
Unrelenting. Yeah. And I sort of, again, in a way, like Joaquin Phoenix comes out of this a little bit unscathed because everything around him is also so terrible that I don't really focus on his performance, which again, I
Right.
found incredibly boring. But again, maybe the material wasn't there enough or,
No, there is
there
no
were,
material. There's no vision. There's no
there,
plan here.
exactly. I mean, a couple moments. And maybe the one thing I thought was sort of interesting is the scene where he's going to the courthouse and sort
Yeah.
of practicing his laughter and, oh, how can I get back into this persona of the Joker again to give the people what they wanted? And I did like that one fantasy sequence when he's like killing everyone in the courtroom. I thought that was kind of fun. But man, like, again, actual prison. I don't know how many years, not life sentence. I'm not going to be harsh about this, but maybe 10 years in jail. No hard labor, even. We could just put him in a cell and make him watch this movie, is what I would do as punishment. But I'm very glad this movie is failing as badly as it did, not only because I just don't ever want Todd Phillips near this franchise again in any way. But I think it's just desserts from what I felt was a terrible movie they delivered last time. I'm glad this one is getting totally destroyed.
Yeah, it's for nobody, It's just for
Right.
him, I think. And yeah, it's just sad, disappointing.
Oh well, there it
Oh
is, Joker
well.
2. I mean, people have already not seen it, so I can't say to them don't see it because no one did. So I don't need to say do stay away from this movie as far as you can for the rest of your life. And if you ever see Todd Phillips in person, a citizen's arrest is what I will do. Hi there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I review a new release and then discuss 6 other movies made by that film's actor or director and how they shaped us. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.